When we are teaching content with literacy, we want to also bring in the disciplinary ways of thinking of that particular discipline. So what do scientists do? Scientists make observations, scientists ask questions, scientists make hypotheses. But when we're teaching science in particular, vocabulary is an extremely important part of remembering and understanding the information. Here I'm talking about learning special content words as opposed to all-purpose academic words. When we think about the word evolution, it just carries so much meaning. There are so many concepts attached to it. One of the best ways to teach vocabulary for science, I think, is to use an exercise that was introduced to us by Victoria Capecci of the New York City Board of Ed. What we asked students to do for this exercise was to sit together and discuss the relationship between the two terms and then write a sentence or two that explained the relationship.
Do you get what I mean?
I think it's species in this particular group. So like in sexually reproducing organisms, this is what species means.
So yeah, isn't a hypothesis, most hypotheses, like written in a form of a question? So it's a question that can be answered.
Were organisms adaptive traits? Isn't that something we already talked about up here? Adaptation,
Traits and yeah.
traits. All right, so let's assume that since it's already covered,
Okay.
remember it's fair game. Fair enough?
Okay, so natural selection is when organisms.
And that accomplishes two things. First of all, it really helps students further reinforce their understanding and articulate their understanding. And it also provides practice for the constructed response parts of the task. So just read what you wrote.
One of many programs in the DNA that codes for one trait characteristic of an organism. This trait can be passed from the parent to the offspring. For example, blood type or eye color.
Tell me about the process of writing this.
We were trying to find some analogous processes that kids would understand. I used to use recipes, but people don't really use recipes anymore. And kids understand programming better.
Okay.
So we thought that maybe if we used programming and then codes, that might make more sense for them than some of the other words we could use. And the gene in the DNA determines how the trait will be expressed in the organism, and so we just made that evident, and the fact that it's genetic and passed between the parent and the offspring in the second sentence.
What we found helpful was chunking the definitions into smaller, more manageable ideas.
Okay.
Because, you know, they're comprehensive definitions, but they're long.
Right.
And so by chunking them, we could kind of say how much is really relevant, you know, critical versus just giving it more of a general definition.
Right.
For me, being a math teacher, if I was to actually take this on, I would really have to do a lot of research. And as Ms. Amatura says, in regards to breaking down certain vocabulary words or terminologies, for me, I'd have to understand it first.
Right.
And then work.
Right. Definitely. Yes, I think that's a good point. We have to be saturated with it first. I've talked in some of my other videos about structuring reading lessons in terms of pre-reading, reading, and post-reading. In this particular lesson that I was teaching about adaptation, first we just reviewed two really important concepts that led up to this concept of natural selection and adaptation, and those were carrying capacity, the idea that an environment can really only support so many individuals of a population. Last night when we were talking about rabbits, we realized that, so populations have the potential to increase exponentially, but populations generally remain stable once they reach a certain size. Natural resources are limited. Why do some individuals die and some live? And that's what we're going to be exploring now for the next hour or so. What are some of the things that rabbits are facing in the wild? Predators. Limited resources.
They also need to be faster than the dog, right?
They need to be faster than the predator. The other concept is inheriting traits. Those two ideas are sort of precursors to understanding adaptation. So after we had reviewed those two ideas, I gave the students some pictures of rabbits. And I asked them which rabbit they thought would survive in an Arctic environment.
Background. There's the grass is not green,
Right,
so you can tell
right.
temperature
That's what I'm
change, right?
For Solomon, I'm looking at the environment in the background. I don't think Solomon lives in a polar region or Arctic.
We pretty much think that Itsy Bitsy Flopsy and Ken live in polar region
Okay, and why do you think that?
because they look like snowballs.
That, and we also think dawn.
Dawn.
Yeah, agreed.
You're right. Those are both examples of the pictures of the Arctic hare.
Can you clarify that? Are you saying that this and this?
They're
are
both the Arctic hare.
Same
Same species. So what do you think that means? What happened? Why do they look different? Flopsy and Ken, what time of year do we think it is for them? It's winter. Okay. Right? But what about for dawn? What time of year is it for dawn? Okay. So they change. They can change color. What advantage does it give this animal in this environment?
It's able to camouflage in both summer and winter.
Okay, so it can change coat color.
That got us into the idea of adaptation, that animals adapt to certain environments. And so the actual reading part of the lesson involved reading some chapters about the way that different animals adapt to the Arctic, and then reading a different chapter about the way that different animals adapt to the desert environment. And for that part of the lesson, students were taking notes in graphic organizers. They need to practice that thinking process of drawing out the important information and noting it down in a graphic organizer. But it also invites them to think about categories of information. One of the things that I ask them to think about is, how can we categorize these? Are some of these about adapting to hot? Are some of them about adapting to cold? Are some of them about adapting to the environment? Because that's not the only kind of adaptation that organisms make.
So the traits are, there's two traits, hollow fur and black skin. What's that advantage? What does the hollow fur do?
Insulates and lets light through.
How could that be helpful for students to do something like that?
It helps them make connections between why an animal has a trait because of the advantages it gives the animal.
Right.
Yeah.
And it helps focus what they're reading for. They're reading, but they're keeping in mind that I'm looking for specific information so I can eliminate distractors and just pull the things out. That is such a helpful comment. Thank you for saying that. The main things that we have to help them learn to do is to really pull out what they need to know. And you know, I can't say it enough, because I think especially for lower and sort of the middle grade levels, that's really what they need to learn to do, and it's not so easy for them. And it also helps them a little bit to separate these ideas. Sometimes when you ask students, they kind of glom it all together, and here we're kind of separating these categories of information, and what they need a lot of times for like the writing test is they need to be able to identify the relationship between ideas. So if you were students, I would be spending a lot of time on this, and we would contrast. I would give half the room a fact sheet about deserts, and they would be reading, you'll see in here, there's also some sections about desert organisms and how they survive. Because I want them to understand that I don't want them to just look at one environment. I want them to see there's different types of environments and that animals adapt to those environments in different ways.
The final part of that lesson involved completing some sentence starters about adaptation. That was to kind of reinforce and nail down what they had learned. It also helps them realize that a lot of times we think in terms of a main idea and supporting details or evidence.
Let's fill this in together. So animals adapt to polar regions in a variety of ways. One way is
Cold color.
for example,
The Arctic hare.
So that really helps them remember the content because it's organized. So those are some ways that I try to scaffold the essay so that students can really write a successful essay and understand what it is that they're supposed to do when they write this type of essay. The last way that I think reading and writing can really be integrated into science lessons in a meaningful way is, of course, through essay writing. Once they understand some basic concepts, it's important to give them practice drawing information from different sources. In this particular essay lesson, the question was, evolution, why should I care? And we focused on antibiotic resistance, which is one of the main ways that students can apply their knowledge of evolution in a way that might be important to their own lives. And so we built it up by asking students to first read a simple text from ReadWorks about antibiotics and what they are. They then looked at a graph that showed the way the death rate from tuberculosis has gone down with the use of antibiotics. And then they read an article from News ELA about the skyrocketing TB cases in India that are due to antibiotic resistance. And then they were given a graphic organizer to take notes on different categories of information from both texts, and then a template to write an essay. Because now we are moving into it's a problem, and we're going to write about it and tell other people about this problem and explain it to them. Your assignment is going to be to write an informational essay about antibiotic resistance. What should be included? What categories of information? What are you going to talk about in your essay? For instance, why is it important? Right, that's one thing. What else? How does it work? How can it, and I'm going to say, how can it be prevented, to be a little sort of bigger? Be prevented and treated. So that was our jog. Okay, this is a way to use what they've learned in the service of writing and in the service of thinking about why it still matters. It's also evidence that evolution continues, that it works, that it really does work this way.